The focus shifts to the main development region as tropical development becomes increasingly possible. What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be talking about the Atlantic. We're going to be talking about the main development region. We're going to be talking about conditions, about potential tropical development that might be happening. So we're just going to go ahead and dive into that in just a second. But before we do that, I know there are a lot of people in the Deep South that are still reeling from Tropical Storm Arthur. It is officially dissipated. The remnants are out in the Atlantic right now. But I know that a lot of people have been affected by that. My heart, thoughts, and prayers are out for you guys. I wish for a nice and speedy recovery, especially from all the flash flooding that occurred down there. But with that being said, we're going to jump right into this. Starting off right here, we're going to kind of switch up the scene a little bit. We're looking at our 850 U winds because what we're going to be doing with this is we're going to be looking at our U wind anomalies, and we're going to be looking using that to kind of detail, okay, what's our trade winds going to look like, and what is our wind shear going to be like over the next couple of weeks? Because at this current point in time, Arthur's already been dissipated. It's in the Atlantic right now. My main focus has shifted more so towards the main development region and the Atlantic basin for the time being, mainly just to kind of see, okay, what's the temperature check over there? What are the water temperatures going to do? And how is our shear going to act? Because I noticed that the shear has become a little bit more troughy and ridgy. And it's not at this Caribbean graveyard look that we've seen over the last little while. So I want to go, okay, what are we looking at now, and how is this going to correlate with the development down the line? So starting off right here, across much of the Caribbean and the main development region, you have our purple U-wind anomalies, which are indicative of below average U-wind. What this indicates right here, ladies and gentlemen, is weaker trade winds. The purple in the Atlantic indicates weaker trade winds across much of the basin, and that's what's going on in the tropical Atlantic, even extending into the northern tropics as well in this part of the central Atlantic. And you have our red anomalies, which are stronger winds than average, and at least in the tropics, stronger trade winds in some parts, like off the coast of Morocco and off the coast of Florida as well. You have our stronger trade winds over here as well. But ultimately, at least for right now, you're looking at weaker trade winds, at least for the 5-day anomaly that's going to be for the next 5 days. And then as time continues to progress, that only continues to increase as we get to late June. It starts to fluctuate a little bit. It really increases in the Atlantic basin over here. And then it starts to kind of go all over the place in the western main development region, becomes a little bit more above average, and then it gets down to the below average again. It becomes a lot more kind of, instead of concentrated in the main development region and in the tropical Atlantic, it becomes more widespread, but also a little bit more inconsistent as well. But regardless of that, this is actually an indication to two things for me. The first thing that this is indicating to me is, at least from what I've seen from this as well as the other models that I've looked at, what this is indicating at least a lower shear average generally to me, just looking at the grand scheme of things. At least the shear patterns are going to be a little bit on the lower side across much of the tropics and even in the subtropics as we get towards the start of July, as well as we're starting to see this huge anomaly in parts of the Azores Islands over here that we're going to want to pay attention to, and I'm curious to see how that will pan out, and what that's also going to do maybe to the dry air aspect of it as well. But ultimately, you're seeing a lower shear probability, especially in parts of the Gulf, as we get later into June and into early July, and then as we get to parts of the Caribbean and the main development region, you're seeing your lower shear values. And what this is also going to lead to is our second factor, which is increased water temperatures. Taking a quick look at the Atlantic right now, our water temperatures have continued to really ramp up over the last couple of weeks or so. As the main areas that have been seeing a lot of heating are areas in the Gulf region, in the Caribbean, as well as the Atlantic Basin over here. But based on what I am seeing with these U-wind anomalies, I would expect a lot more heating occurring in this part of the main development region, south of the Cabo Verde Islands as well. That would be the main area, and we're already starting to see that. You're definitely seeing the water temperatures increase to over 26 degrees Celsius over in this part of the region as well. You've definitely seen that line move slowly and slowly further up to the north and slowly further to the east as well, and from this side as well, mainly in the northern tropical basin in the Atlantic. But by and large, this is where I'd expect a lot of the warming to occur over the next week or so. The Caribbean also is going to see quite a bit of warming if that U-wind anomaly continues to remain the way it is, and things will really start to ramp up. I mean, look at this. We're already looking at 28 degrees Celsius water temperatures across much of the Caribbean. It's with the exception of this isolated spot in the central Caribbean that we're paying attention to. I would keep a very close eye on that. I would not be surprised if we really start seeing that heat up over the next week or so, and maybe that 28 degrees Celsius a contour really fill in over here off the coast of the Haiti and the Dominican Republic and South America as well. So we're going to want to watch out for that. We're going to want to keep a close eye on that factor as well. But shifting back to this right here, I do want to go ahead and pull up our wind shear map as well, just to kind of see how this will correlate, because you're looking at water temperatures. Those U-winds are definitely going to help the waters in the tropical Atlantic really heat up. Subtropics, at least later down the line, will definitely start to ramp up as well, but I'm just wanting to see how this is correlating. It's actually correlating pretty nicely with what we're seeing across much of the Atlantic. You're seeing lower shear values in much of the Caribbean. You're seeing that that trough and that ridge really pick up from this high pressure system over here in parts of the Atlantic Basin, and you're seeing generally lower shear across parts of the Atlantic Ocean in the main development region. That's definitely something you're going to want to watch out for, and you do start seeing a shear pocket developing, a pretty massive shear pocket developing in this region right here, especially the western MDR in the next 2 days or so. Gonna want to watch to see how that pans out, but ultimately that shear does start to pick back up once again. It starts to recover, and it starts to get this classic graveyard setup over here once again. So we're gonna want to pay attention to that, but the eastern MDR becomes a lot less on the shear side. You're also looking at the Atlantic Basin in general in the southern subtropics and the northern tropics. You're not seeing too much shear over there as well. That's a pretty big shear pocket. But you're definitely noticing, at least in the Gulf, you're noticing a bit of a wild card scenario. These troughs and ridges over here in North America are pushing further and further up to the north as time continues to go on, mainly as severe weather season while it's still going very strong across much of the United States in June. By the time we get to July, it starts to shift further and further and further up to the north in areas like the Great Plains, Minnesota as well, and even Wisconsin too. And what that ultimately does to the tropics is it leads to less shear from North America driving into the Gulf and driving into the Caribbean, and it gives it more of an opening after that point. That's part of the reason why, with the exception of what we saw with Arthur, you don't typically see tropical cyclones this early in the hurricane season. It's still not necessarily the best environment for tropical or hurricane development. There are exceptions to the rule, obviously. Barrel's a very infamous example of that as well. But ultimately, June is part of the reason June is so quiet climatologically is because you still have severe weather season going on in the United States. And those synoptics definitely play a big part into tropical cyclone development. But ultimately, as time progresses, as we get to around June 28th, you're seeing a pretty considerable increase in the shear across parts of the northern MDR and parts of the Caribbean right here. That classic graveyard setup starts to pick back up. It definitely correlates, too, with those U-winds starting to ramp up a little bit more as well. But as we get into July, things start to get a little bit more interesting. It does remain relatively the same, but you are noticing, at least on the eastern side of this shear pattern as it moves closer towards Africa, you're noticing this lift up further up to the north. You can see this. This is where we are at on July 3rd. This is the morning of July 3rd. And then as we get to the 4th of July, it starts to move and shift further up to the north. That's definitely an interesting setup right there. Definitely could give some more breathing room to some more tropical development, especially as those waves continue to emerge off the coast of Africa. We're going to want to pay attention to that as well. But there's also another factor that I'm watching too that I feel like was kind of undervalued from my coverage last year. But I feel like this is also very important to emphasize as well. And that goes back to our water temperatures as well. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the map of the full Atlantic water temps again, just to emphasize my point. So this is what we got for you guys right here. And I'm doing this right here because I want to emphasize something. So this is June 20th, 2026. Here's our water temperatures, very warm across much of the tropics, but you're noticing there's a bit of a drop off between the tropics and the subtropics as well. That was a kind of a curious thing I noted from this year, because last year what we noticed was a lot of the water temperatures just really surged up into the subtropics, especially on the western and in the central part of the Atlantic basin. You had 28, 29 degree water temperatures at around like 35 degrees to 40 degrees north in latitude, which is very atypical for the subtropical Atlantic. And what that ultimately led to was stability issues across much of the Atlantic. So what I mean by that is there was a lot more stability in the Atlantic, and for any type of convection to develop, there has to be a little bit of instability for severe weather or what is convective available potential energy. In the tropics, it's typically water temperatures, lower shear, and a little bit of that lift to go up for the water temperatures to evaporate and condense. But ultimately, what we noticed last year was there was a lot less instability, especially going into July and August outside of Erin. And the reason for that was mainly because the water temperatures were further up to the north. Like the anomalies in the subtropical Atlantic were absolutely crazy last year. This year, they're not nearly as bad. The water temperatures are a lot further to the south, mainly staying below the 30-degree north line that I've noticed. And what I'm wondering here is the stability issues going to be as much of a factor in 2026? Because a big reason why 2025 wasn't as active and why we had these crazy swings of intensity between either tropical storms or Category 5 hurricanes was because of mainly not just because of shear, but because of stability problems. You didn't have the instability needed for a lot of these systems to get their act together, and the times you did, well, we all saw what happened. Aaron, Humberto, Melissa as well. But ultimately, that was a big factor as to what's going on. I don't see these stability issues being as big of a factor. And I talked to Logan Rounds, and I talked to Ethan about it as well, Ethan WX. And I found it kind of curious to see get their perspectives. Ethan in particular noted that because the winter was extremely cold across parts of the northeastern United States, it also carried over into the subtropics, and that's why the water temperatures are as cold as they are in that region. And they still haven't fully recovered from that. Because remember, if you were tuning in from the Midwest, if you're tuning in from the eastern half of the U.S., you had massive polar plunges from this. And that carried over into the subtropics and really dropped your temperatures down. Like, one of those isn't going to do much, but when you have it over and over and over and over again, those water temperatures stay very cold. And that kind of is what's going on here. And it kind of reset the table a little bit for your water temperatures. And that's why you have that line, I'd say around 28 to 29 degrees north, where you're seeing a massive drop-off between 28 degrees Celsius and 24 degrees Celsius. That's why you're seeing that drop-off, because they haven't fully recovered. I know I've been rambling on for a few minutes about this at this point, but I did want to bring up this important issue, and I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit more, because what I'm thinking is going to be happening is while I don't necessarily see this being a hyperactive hurricane season, I don't see that at all, obviously. And NOAA is predicting below average. I do think there is going to be a twist with this hurricane season, and I think we're going to see more power than I think a lot of people are going to expect. And what I mean by that is looking at the shear profile, looking at the moisture profile as well. I want to first take a quick gander at our shear anomalies. Yeah, the shear across much of the tropics right now is pretty interesting to say the very least. You're at least for what I'm noticing for right now, it's not necessarily too bad. For June, you're definitely seeing those above average anomalies across much of the main development region. Lower MDR is a little bit below average, but as we get to July, you are seeing these above average anomalies starting to pick up again. Those are going to fluctuate. Those are going to go up and down as time continues to progress. And especially as that shear lifts further up to the north, you're definitely going to see this above average anomaly really start to move out of the MDR and move more closer towards the Atlantic basin and the subtropical region as we get to later parts of July and early August. And in terms of your tropical development, I would say that for right now, based on what I'm seeing, I'd say your tropical development chances based on what I'm seeing with these maps already, because I know there were some models that were indicating potential development for the Windward Islands and Venezuela and all of that stuff, but I would say that chance for development, if it were to happen, would ultimately go down after June 28th. So we have about 8 days or so of tropical development potential to happen before that wind shear slams it shut. But I do want to take a quick gander at the dry air aspect of this as well, because that's also going to be a bit of a wild card. Let's look at our relative humidity. Relative humidity, let's take a look at it just on the surface. And on paper, what we're seeing right here is you're definitely seeing more of a moisture infusion across parts of the main development region. Yes, you have some dry air over here, but you do have a moisture pocket over here in parts of the southern MDR. If that dry air can stay out of that moisture pocket and the ITCZ can cause some more tropical convection over here, you might have a situation where this dry air, which at least on the southern side of it looks more mixable than the typical Sahara dust that we see, is ultimately going to maybe increase that chance for tropical development a bit further. But you do start seeing another moisture pocket starting to emerge around June 24th or so. I would say this right here is probably, at least for right now, for June, you're probably your last shot at MDR development over here, mainly because the dry air is not too bad. The shear, it's kind of starting to creep back in there, but ultimately you do have that moisture pocket, and you do see that dry air kind of retreat a little bit. But as we start to get to June 30th and going into July, you are seeing an increase of dry air over here, but I am noticing it's lifting further up to the north, which is why I was looking at those wind shear maps earlier, because the wind shear, what I've noticed as it shifted further up to the north, is also kind of keeping and carrying this dry air all the way into the subtropical Atlantic, which is a big, considerable shift compared to what we've seen previously. Normally, with Sahara air, it moves into parts of the main development region, maybe in the Atlantic basin, but this is going into the subtropics. That's staying out of the main development region mostly, and that, to me, is going, okay, this is interesting. The reason this is interesting is because we're looking at a completely different pattern from what we've seen in years past. 2024, a lot of dry air in the MDR. 2025, less dry air in the MDR, but stability issues. 2026, more dry air, but in the wrong places right here. And I want to go ahead also and look at our precipitable water anomalies. Yeah, precipitable water anomalies, definitely interesting. Across the main development region, you're looking at more moisture than average, and in some cases by a pretty considerable margin too. And that is something I am concerned about, especially as we get past late June, as we start going into July. After late July, if this continues to hold up, I would be raising some alarm bells with this, because you're looking at more instability in general across the Atlantic. Yes, your shear is not going to necessarily be the best. You're dealing with an El Nino at this current point, but your dry air aspect of this is becoming less and less and less of a factor, and that is screaming to me, okay, need to start taking this very seriously very soon, and all the updates that we have on this, we will continue to keep you updated on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Feel free to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. We'd love to have some people hang out with us and help us out too. With that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.